That's why, for example, with my students, I always tell them, do not try to be over-prepared for today's labor market. The main skill that you need to acquire these years that you're in university and so on is adaptability. Learn how to learn new skills at every point in your life, because you really don't know when you're going to need them. So learn many things in many different fields. Don't concentrate in just one narrow thing that seems to be right now the most important one, because it's going to disappear.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/The Rational View. Together, we can make a better future.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. I've been exploring recently the impacts of what I call the artificial intelligence revolution we're currently experiencing surrounding the release of ChatGPT and its rapidly expanding progeny and similar AI large language models. Today, I want to explore the economic impacts of ChatGPT gobbling up white-collar jobs in an analogous way to how robotics and automation have devastated blue-collar jobs and salaries. I originally discussed this issue in one of my first podcasts on income inequality, We Botched It, where I point out that blue-collar workers are no longer able to afford the same lifestyle of their parents and previous generations. Robotics have taken over their jobs, and the proceeds of this revolution, instead of being shared with the workers, has been gobbled up by business owners. We're on track right now for another similar crash amongst white-collar jobs, unless we smarten up and fix the system. And I think this is one of the most important issues facing our society today, this and environmental concerns. To explore the impacts of this AI revolution, I have a distinguished economist with me today who has recently published in Nature a paper called Robots, Labor Markets, and Universal Basic Income. If you do like what you're hearing, I would urge you to press like on your podcast app and help raise the profile of this podcast so that others can hear this important message. Also, if you want to discuss this, please join our Rational View Facebook group, where we can have more detailed conversations on this and other topics of interest. Antonio Cabrales has a PhD in economics from University of California, San Diego, and is a professor at Universidad Carlos III. He has been a professor at University College London and at Universitat Pompeu Fabra. He is executive vice president of the European Economic Association, fellow of the Econometric Society, former president of the Spanish Economic Association, and recipient of the King Rejom I Prize in Economics in 2021. He's worked in a wide range of topics: game theory, the economics of networks, mechanism design, economics of education, experimental and behavioral economics. He's an associate editor of the Journal of Economic Theory and has edited and published in several economic journals and physical review letters. Dr. Cabrales, welcome to The Rational View.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you coming on. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in economics? Like why did you choose the field of economics to specialize in?
Interesting. So when I was in high school, I was kind of good at math, but on the other hand, Spain in 1975 there was an elderly dictator who died, and luckily we democracy was starting. So it was very exciting to see the country evolving into a new kind of world. But actually, that coincided with, most of your audience will have not heard about these things, but the two big oil shocks, so 1973, then 1979, because of all the wars in the Middle East, and then the cartel by OPEC forms, and then they decide they want to exert more pressure, and they start raising the prices, and that gave rise to two big recessions worldwide that actually, sort of like the current one, increased greatly inflation, prices, unemployment. So Spain, you may have heard, that has very high unemployment now. It's on the order of 15%, but it's been 22%, and so massive by European and American standards. But in 1973, it has an unemployment rate of 2-3%, and inflation was basically 2%, like in all developed countries. And it went from this to massive unemployment, massive inflation in the mid-70s, right about the same time that democracy started. So, there were many people claiming, look, we lived better under Franco, so the general that died, luckily for us, in 75. So many people were kind of making claims that on the face of it, if you just look at the time series, Franco dies and all hell breaks loose in the Spanish economy. So because I liked math, I had a bit of an analytical mind and said, this doesn't quite sound right. It's true Franco has died, but a lot of other stuff has happened in the middle. I really want to understand how all these important things for our society work. And I decided at that point that I wanted to study something that had this kind of good analytical background, but on the other hand, we tried to understand important social phenomena. And that's how I ended up doing economics. This was the environment of my life at the time that guided me through this.
So now you are the executive vice president of the European Economic Association. Can you tell me a little bit about what the Economic Association does?
Well, first of all, the name is a fancy name, but basically means is I'm the secretary treasurer. It's just that there's been inflation also in titles, and now everyone is a vice president or this or that. So it's lowly work. So what I do for the association is I manage the internal staff, make sure that the money comes in, goes out. Now the activities that the association does, like most scientific societies, is we publish a journal, the Journal of the European Economic Association, and we have a yearly congress, which is in August, end of August, which I recommend everyone to go because it's quite fun. This year it's in Barcelona, so you shouldn't miss it if you're interested in economics, or interested in economics in general. And the other thing we do recently, we've organized a job market for academic economists over the last 5 years or so. It used to be that European economists went to the American job market, but now we've organized one, and people in young academics typically, so people just finishing their PhDs go to the job market, which now is virtual, but still it's a virtual job market where people can post their PhD papers and their CVs and so on, and universities that are interested match with them, and then eventually they maybe get invited for a visit to the campus, and from this normally you get some offers. So those are the three main activities of the society. There are other things. We have a committee called Women in Economics that's tried to do something like a mentoring retreat for women in economics, a minority in economics committee. There is an education committee that tries to understand how better to educate people in economics.
Very interesting. So the reason I invited you on this podcast is you published a paper in Nature. Congratulations. It was entitled Robots, Labor Markets, and Universal Basic Income. And in this paper, you analyzed the impacts of automation on workers and came away with some very interesting conclusions. Could you maybe give us an overview of this work and what you did?
I think it might be best to start with trying to talk to folks about what is universal basic income, what's interesting about it, and why people are potentially excited about this idea, and what are the reasons. Because this is really the framework. Unless you think everyone knows about it, I think it's better to
let's go over the universal basic income, because I know there's a lot of different concepts about what this entails, whether there's like you have to qualify for it, or if you just hand out money to everybody? Is there a graded pay scale? What does universal basic income and how is it best implemented?
So welfare programs are kind of very different in scope, and in the world, people have invented all sorts of things. One of them is called universal basic income, and the idea under universal basic income is that everyone, just for the reason that you're a citizen of a particular state, would receive a fixed amount of money, and everybody would receive it independently of whether they're working or not working, or are old or young. And in some cases, universal basic income is different for different age groups, but that's the maximum difference you can do. It's under 18 you get some amount of money, bigger than 18 another amount of money. This contrasts with most welfare programs, in which usually there are things that you need to have to qualify. So sometimes, for example, the earned income tax credit, you need to be working, for example, in order to have it. Many welfare programs, you might need to have a family, for example, otherwise you don't. So there's many reasons, or you need to justify that you earn below a certain amount of money to receive money from the state, for example. The idea of universal basic income is you get rid of all these things. Everyone has a certain amount of money for the reason that you're simply a citizen of the state. Now, something that's interesting about the universal basic income is that even very conservative economists, at some point when the idea started being floated, were in favor of it. And the reason is that some welfare programs can have a serious disincentive to work for the reason that they exist. It's as if you need to earn below a certain amount of money in order to get the welfare payment. This means that if you start working, you lose the welfare payment, and this creates a disincentive to work. That now, if you want, we can talk later about what can you do in that kind of welfare program to make this not so likely to happen. But that was a general idea in the minds of some economists. I said, well, universal basic income will not be a disincentive to work because everyone gets it. So if you earn more, if you work, then you earn more money. So there's no disincentive in that respect. So that was one reason why this program kind of was favored, even among Milton Friedman famously was in favor of universal basic income, for example. Now, there are two big complications to universal basic income. One we did not deal with, which is the cost. We can talk about this later if you want. The other is that even though in principle it's neutral with respect to work incentives, it really is not in the mind of kind of traditionally trained economists. So most economists, in fact, I would say maybe even most people, have what I would call a marginalist view of incentives to work and so on, which basically means that income, the benefit, the utility that you get from an additional unit of income is different if you're earning very little than if you're earning a lot of money. So think about it, what would Elon Musk do with $100 extra a month? Probably nothing. He wouldn't even notice it. It's so far down the zeros in his bank account or income that they don't mean anything to it. So if you say, Elon, if you earn, I will pay you $100 extra so that you work 1 hour, let's say, he will laugh at you. Whereas if you earn very little, next to nothing, and you say, I'll pay you $100 extra a month so that you work, 2 hours a week, you would be really excited about it because this ends up being a serious amount of money. So because of this, what we call concavity in income or diminishing marginal returns of an extra unit of income, if people earn a lot of money, so if they, let's say, just to make the case, very stark, if the universal basic income was 100,000 a year in income, then probably there would be some disincentives to start working, because after all, you're going to get 100,000 without doing anything. Why should you?
You can live in luxury without working. Yeah,
exactly. So in principle and in theory, this means that there could be a disincentive even to a program that was created or was, the idea came just so that there was less disincentive to work as the more traditional welfare programs. So this is the context in which we launched the experiment. So our experiment, one of the ideas is it true that in fact, for kind of some amounts of money, if you pay people a fixed amount of money, they will make less efforts? And that was the idea that we tried to test in a laboratory experiment. So in the laboratory experiment, what we did is two groups of people. The people interact in the experiment with the experimenters for 2 periods. In the first periods, they do some task. There's some sums and multiplications. I remember some basic arithmetic task, and you get paid for how many of these things you do well. And then in the second period, you are told that there's some chance that you will be replaced by a machine if you don't work hard enough or something. And then you're told to repeat again the level of effort and see how well you do. And then that's just one treatment. In the other treatment, it's the same thing. So first period is the same for everyone, but in the second period, you're told, in addition, oh, by the way, we're going to pay you a fixed amount of, I don't remember, €3 or something like this. And you can still do your sums and your multiplications, but in addition to that, you have a guaranteed €3 extra. So that's literally what the universal basic income does. They guarantee you an income, and in addition, you can work as much as you can. Okay? And the question is, will the guarantee of having some income make people do less sums and multiplications and some arithmetic? That was the question the experiment tried to answer. There are a couple other questions we tried to answer, but that's the basic one. And the answer was actually no, it doesn't make any difference. Whether you promise people €3 extra or no €3 extra, they're going to make the same amount of computations. And actually, although we mentioned some of this in the paper, this is consistent with other results people have obtained in the literature with other kinds of experiments, sometimes field experiments, and so on and so forth. So the disincentives, the potential theoretical disincentives to work from having a little bit extra income really don't seem to materialize in most of the experiments that people have done out there. Ours was particularly, clean, because it's a laboratory, everything is very controlled, so there are less questions than some of the other empirical work. But generally, my sense from the literature is the potential disincentive from universal basic income is not there. Because I think if you think about it for a second, we're not promising anyone to earn $100,000 or euros a month or a year. They're promised modest amounts of money. So if you promise someone, hey, instead of just being always worried about your livelihood, you're going to guarantee to have, let's say, $500, $700. In addition, if you earn extra money, fine, you keep it. It's hard to see how that could be a serious disincentive.
Certainly in society, one of the biggest complaints we hear about against universal basic income, including the cost, of course, is that it would make workers lazy. If they don't have a gun to their head that they are going to starve to death if they don't work, then why would they work in these menial jobs? Do you think this experiment was good in that it was taking into account the sort of factors that would affect UBI, or are there criticisms potentially against this approach of just giving them €3 as opposed to?
No, I totally agree. That's why I mentioned not just my experiment, but a bunch of other empirical work that has tested similar things in the field and in other settings. And sometimes it was a little bit less clean, but the kind of the balance of the evidence seems to suggest that even if you did it in reality with people that were earning, some modest amounts of, universal basic income, like I said, in the order of, I think the standard idea is to have universal basic income, a guarantee at what's usually considered the poverty threshold level in most societies, which tends to be something like 60% of median income. So you guarantee that amount of money to everyone, and then on top of that, you can earn whatever you want for the experiments that have been done in other places in the field, they seem to suggest that kind of guarantee is not really a disincentive. Because if you think about it, like, in Spain, earning 600 euros a month, life is shit, really. I mean, pardon my French, as you say, but if you could earn 300 more euros, of course you would try to earn 300 more euros. So the complaints about disincentives to work come from people that have never lived in that kind of life, and of course don't understand the pressures of it. And I would tell to these people, why don't you spend a few months earning, 600, universal basic income and nothing else, and then see what happens if someone offers you some kind of decent work.
Mm-hmm. And some of the other discussions around universal basic income are that, perhaps this simplifies the welfare, takes out some of the bureaucracy to distributing welfare with a bunch of rules that you need to apply. So it actually, saves some money in sort of the bureaucracy that would be necessary to oversee it if it's just a flat fee across the board. And I understand, I like the benefit of the flat payment because, as you say, it doesn't have any disincentives for work. It doesn't affect people that are well off at all. It's a minor impact on their overall living, but it could have a major impact on people that are just getting by. And I think some of the benefits of this in terms of feedback into society, of getting rid of the stress and allowing people to have, to maybe eat better, to take some of the pressure off the healthcare system, for example, when, you have to choose between, food and heat, for example, with energy prices the way they are. So I think the universal basic income theory of welfare is probably a very good one. Now, in your understanding, does universal basic income replace a lot of the welfare machinery in the state, or is it in addition to that?
It should, because universal basic income is very expensive. So unless it does that, like replace all the machinery of the welfare state, and in addition, probably, one would still need a lot of income to kind of get away with it. But in addition, you would need the extra benefits coming from, as you say, diminished impact on the healthcare system, and potentially education, maybe even productivity in the long run. Now, I cannot imagine that let's say the 20% of people or 30% of people that are earning less money in the most developed societies, there could be, lots of hidden geniuses there that never flower because they never have a chance. And imagine what we can do with, 30% more of really talented people running companies, or being, medical doctors, or engineers, or physicists, or what have you. There would have to be some extra benefit in there.
What about impact on, say, crime rates? Is there any research that supports an impact of universal basic income on decreasing crime rates?
Yes, I think there is, although I cannot remember a paper on the top of my head, but this is another of the things that is claimed. And if you think about it a little bit, we know that societies like, Nordic societies in Europe have far less crime than others, once you control for a lot of other factors. And lower inequality is known to be beneficial for reduction of crime. So the lowering in inequality, and especially the lowering in poverty, certainly has got to have good impacts on crime.
Yeah. Now, getting back to your paper, I skimmed through that. You actually explored in that work the possibility of a robot substitution tax in that work, if you recall. Can you explain what that is and how that would work?
That's right. So the idea is that one of the reasons why universal basic income is floated as a potential solution to social problems is the fact that with some likelihood artificial intelligence is going to eat into some jobs, especially in fact middle income jobs. So maybe not so much at the lower tier of the distribution, or even higher tier of the distribution, but so there will be maybe not necessarily some unemployment, that some people displaced temporarily from work. And one thing that's been floated is maybe, and we need to have some kind of, let's say, disincentive for the very quick introduction of robots, so that unemployment doesn't grow fast, or at least people have a chance to adjust and move out of the jobs that are going to disappear and go elsewhere into the system. And so what we tested is the possibility that the managers that are running the robots, when they're facing the choice of whether replacing one of their workers and hiring a robot, they have to pay some extra money for the replacement. And we saw that, in fact, as wouldn't be very surprising, if you put a tax in the robots, the introduction of robots is less quick. And that would probably happen in reality. So if people that were hiring, firing people and then buying robots that were made to pay some extra tax, then the tax could pay for the retraining of workers, for those workers that are replaced, and at the same time would probably slow the process down a little bit. Have to say, by the way, that economists have been guilty of saying, okay, more automation and more productivity is good for the economy, same as maybe 30 years ago we were saying that more international trade is probably good for the economy. What we didn't anticipate is that international trade in many developed economies, I'm sure in the United States, I'm not quite sure Canada, but certainly the United States, destroyed a lot of manufacturing jobs. To a large extent, those went to China. And this happened very quick. So the speed at which this happened, although yes, international trade bigs rewards and makes society richer, it happened so quickly that there was no time to reallocate people, and there were some generations of workers that were completely destroyed, didn't have time to. So there are now even some prominent trade economists that are saying maybe next time around that something that is similar to this happens, we should be a bit more careful. And that's one of the reasons why this is thought as a potential policy tool.
I find this a little bit ironic. I remember, thinking, boy, I can't wait for the industrial revolution where we get robots and artificial intelligence to do our work for us, and we'll have tons of leisure time on our hands, but now we're paying people we're making people pay to not implement this so that people can work longer in menial jobs. It just strikes me as very ironic that our system is set up that this is what we need to do.
Well, but I mean, if you think about this, it's true, but sometimes they're not quite menial jobs. So think of the banking industry. There's been massive reduction of work in the Spanish banking industry over the last 15 years or so. These were people that had kind of sort of interesting jobs. They were maybe analyzing, the balance sheets of firms, deciding whether to give them loans or not, and they were doing work that for them felt meaningful, and they were doing something with their lives. The truth is, much of this work can now be done by AI better than humans. So it's fine. It has to go. The only point we are making is maybe you need to make it go a little slower so that these people can retrain and move into other areas where they are needed more. Kind of data analysts that are kind of programming stuff for those same machines. I don't know, but making the process a little bit smoother than we did it the last time when they say, okay, let's move all manufacturing to China and then we'll see.
Yeah, no, I mean, as as ChatGPT rolls out, we can see that whole industries are going to be losing ground in terms of, the work they do is going to be replaced by the software, and even software like programming, software engineering is going to be somewhat impacted by artificial intelligence. We can see this now. So what are the employment impacts that we can expect to see in coming years if this follows the pattern that we might expect? What should we expect to see in terms of the economy and jobs?
So, no, absolutely. We're going to see some serious reductions in employment in many industries, and in particular, there's been so some people like David Autor at MIT, for example, has created these indices of jobs that seem more at risk from AI than others, and this, he is categorized. So now there's some complete classification of jobs at very fine industry levels, and some numbers that are attached to the possibility of one can lose jobs in this. And there are many industries where it's going to be a serious changes and reductions and people that are not going to be needed. So, for example, if you're a radiologist, the interpretation of a scanner from a magnetic resonance scan or something, it's going to be made much better by AI very soon than by the actual radiologist, and there's less need of them. Many legal employees that are making good amounts of money and so on, they're going to disappear. So there are many industries that up until relatively recently seemed protected from the intrusion of robots. They're going to be suffering a hit, and then, of course, jobs will appear elsewhere. So we've seen in all along all the industrial revolutions that jobs are destroyed, jobs appear. So all the things that I've seen by labor economists say that it's not clear that unemployment rates will go up necessarily. In fact, the prediction is they will not go up, but there will be serious employment reallocation. So some people will have to lose their jobs that will be reallocated to other jobs, and it's the reallocation process that it's really the concern. So a lot of the welfare ideas that are appearing, they are to somehow ease the reallocation rather than prevent it, because there's really no way to prevent it. This will happen.
It will also devalue employment in some of these fields, right? I mean, people who are getting a good salary are now going to be competing against AI automation effectively. And I know in the history of blue collar, this devalued blue collar jobs. When robots were brought in to replace blue collar jobs, I would expect a similar thing would happen in white collar jobs, that the whole job field will be devalued and people will be making less, and the people who are running the AIs are going to drag in the profits. Does that seem reasonable?
It's quite possible, yes. So there will be people that whose jobs will seem less useful, less important, and they will lose a lot of their value. And that's almost. That's why, for example, with my students, I always tell them, do not try to be over-prepared for today's labor market. The main skill that you need to acquire these years that you're in university and so on is adaptability. Be able to learn how to learn new skills at every point in your life, because you really don't know when you're going to need them. So learn many things in many different fields. Don't concentrate in just one narrow thing that seems to be right now the most important one, because it's going to disappear. So
if we look at trends in productivity over the years due to robotics, and presumably this is also going to happen as a result of AI, from I think 1970 to the present, the average productivity per hour worked has more than doubled for each worker, yet the number of hours worked has had to increase. because the value has gone down due to competition with the robots, due to offshoring, competition with lower standard of living countries. So we're producing a lot more, but we're making a lot less money. And I think this is just going to continue to aggravate this inequity. The advantages of the automation are concentrated in the hands of the business owners, the 0.1% of the populace, shall we say. And this is, I think, led to massive unrest. And, people want to just tear down the institutions of Western democracy. And there's a huge growth in anger due to this increase in equity. And I think the situation is going to be aggravated by AI. What can we do to prevent further inequity? Is UBI critical to doing this?
Not really, in the sense that, so first to answer your first remark, it's true. There's been a massive amount of increase in productivity that has not gone into salaries. There's a book that I recommend everyone to read if you can. It's called The Profit Paradox from Jan Eckhout. He's a Dutch professor that works in Barcelona. It's published by Princeton University Press. Happens to be a friend, but I'm recommending it because it's a really good book. And one of the things that struck me when I read this book is it has some graphs that show how wages per hour have changed over time. The median wage per hour has grown, and how profit margins have changed over the last 30 years. It's actually quite remarkable. So median wages have, in fact, in many places gone down. The margins of corporations have massively shot up. But the funny thing is, it's not even the profit margins of the representative company. It's the profit margins of a very few companies that have shot up. Now, what's interesting about this is that the solution for this potentially is not that hard. We should pay a lot more attention to competition policies. Think about mergers and which mergers we allow, which mergers we don't. We should regulate the hell out of some companies that are monopolists. I mean, if you're a monopolist, you should be regulated. If you don't want to be regulated, let's destroy the monopolies and kind of partition the companies into different pieces so that they can compete more with one another. So I think that the problem with capitalism is we have over the last 30 years, it's become a monopolistic capitalism. So there's a lot less competition in some key industries that there used to be, and that's not healthy. So the predominance of a very few big companies that at the same time end up having a lot of power and being able to manipulate governments and so on, that's not healthy at all. By the way, inequality has not grown equally in all developed countries. I think maybe one reason why Jan studied this is if you look at the Gini index, a standard measure of inequality in the Netherlands, it hasn't grown that much, or it's basically stable over time. Whereas in Spain or the US, I don't know Canada as well, but this has really gone up over the years. So this has to do with the power that big companies have had over the state and the political system. So yes, universal basic income is a tool, but to a certain extent, it can be a tool to lull people into complacency and to avoid. It's like the Panem circenses that the Roman Empire did. It's just give bread to the poor so that they don't rebel. Actually, in some sense, I would like people not to get universal basic income to see if they react and get rid of the plutocrats that are governing various countries. And,
interesting.
So that might be one alternative way to think about this.
Interesting. So, how do we get rid of the plutocrats? What's other than violent revolution? What
we elect more radical politicians. I think that's the idea.
So we need to highlight these issues and get them on the agenda for discussion and talk to the media and get the media on board, although the media are probably owned by the same folks that don't want to be displaced.
Well, but this is the work that one can do through social media. It's the kind of work that you do, for example, that it's you're on your own and you do stuff like that. So there is a possibility, and I think that it's the grassroots movements that can be, in principle, leveraged through social media can make a big difference.
Okay, so that's interesting. So your position is that regulating of certain industries is probably the best way to go to improve the situation and minimize the inequity.
Yeah, it's either regulating them or breaking up all the kind of big companies that are. So, just to give you an idea, when I was growing up, there were what were called the 7 big banks in Spain. Of these 7 big banks in Spain, there are now only 2. And in fact, that even understates the problem because there were a lot of banks below them, below this big 7, that where people were kind of normal customers that now don't exist at all. There were lots of saving banks that went, under in the last Great Recession. So now the level of competition in the banking industry in Spain is like ridiculous. Almost doesn't exist, and it has been allowed by government after government, both from the left and the right. And in Europe as a whole, you could do more. So we have Amazon pays essentially zero tax profits in Spain. Why? Because they're headquartered in Ireland. Ireland has very low profit taxes. So what do? The mother company in Ireland charges a lot big transfer pricing for the intellectual property to Amazon Spain. So essentially, what this means is that siphons out the profits from Amazon Spain into Amazon Ireland. In Ireland, they don't have to pay anything. So where does all those profits, rather than in the taxes that they should really pay, it ends up in the profit of the Amazon shareholders, who are, as you say, the 0.1 richest percent of richest people in the world. Now, European Union could have it easily. If we vote the right people to European Parliament, we could set, taxation, more uniform taxation rules about in Europe. I mean, it's true, you could have slightly different tax rates, but having certainly basically next to no profit taxes in Ireland, whereas in everywhere else in Europe where you try to tax more, well, you're creating this incentive for these large corporations that have the capacity to send money from one place to the other.
That's interesting, and I think that's a very good observation. The online shopping taxation has taken money out of the system that used to be there for governments, for local governments. Now, another thing I want to touch on is the fact that we've lost competition in a lot of industries. I think is a feature built into the system of increasing profit margins for investors, right? Once you've saturated a market with businesses, the only way to move out is to outcompete your competitors, to gobble them up and to get bigger. And this is almost a requirement. Once you get a certain size, you have to start swallowing up other businesses to keep the growth rate on the proper trajectory to get the returns. Is there anything that can be done? Is that just a part of the system?
But that's no, exactly. That's exactly why the first thing I said as a policy tool is we have competition authorities in all developed countries, and sometimes European Union has its own competition policy authority. Most mergers in tech industry and most acquisitions probably should not be allowed because they're decreasing competition in those industries, which already has relatively little competition. So a more active competition policy authority all around the world would be a good thing for avoiding some of the problems.
I've also heard, and I don't know whether this is, I mean, it seems reasonable, but I've also heard that going to more nonprofit type of industry or employee-owned businesses would end this problem as well. But there doesn't seem to be a way to get from here to there. Have you heard about that as a potential solution to this problem?
Yeah, So that might help as well, because if you give more power in the boards of companies to workers, that would easily lead to a better distribution. So Germany is a good case because they have workers have to be represented in the board of companies with a certain percentage. It's not even a minor one. And you can see that the levels of inequality in Germany are more contained because the kind of the bargains, the wage bargains that the unions do with the companies in Germany are much more serious. That's something else that our elected representatives could decide. Look, you have to put workers on your board. Unions have to have seats in the board. Sometimes if they don't have a majority, you can think, well, maybe, they're a majority and they're not a majority, they don't have enough power. But simply having them sit there and share all the information might be useful, because they might be able to say, some of the things these guys are doing are really disgusting, and they can go to the Competition Policy Authority, for example. They might have more of an incentive to do so. So who knows? But and certainly more representation of workers in company boards might not be a bad idea at all. Of course, if in addition they are not just represented in the board, but they own shares in the companies, that's also probably a good idea. Now, the only risk about that is if you do this through putting pension parts of the pension pot in the company shares, that can be dangerous. You remember when the saving and loans scandals in the US hit, one of the problems was that many employees of saving and loans lost all their money, and that was ridiculous. And this is because the companies more or less forced them to put some big part of their pension funds in the company shares. So that can be tricky in some cases. So I can see why sometimes the workers themselves, the union representatives themselves, sometimes resist the idea of having big shares in the company if this is at the expense of the money that they normally would put into their pension funds. So one has to be a bit careful with this idea. I think one possibility would be to have the unions themselves manage pension funds, and the whole money, it's organized by the unions, and the unions, because they have a big pension fund attached to the union, and then they invest. That's better because the unions get to be represented in the boards as kind of big shareholders, activist shareholders even, but they would be diversified. So I think the key is, if we want to do this employee ownership, do it in a way that doesn't make the workers themselves tied with a large proportion of their savings to a particular company.
That sounds like a wise approach to it. I agree that there's a lot that needs to be done to fix the problem. We've really gone to the inequity end of the Gini curve, as it were. What is popular opinion in Europe regarding universal basic income? Is this something that is a realistic thing to expect could happen, or is it just too far out of the Overton window to be considered?
Well, it's a good theoretical idea to keep in mind. The one thing we didn't talk about, and I think it is a good point to bring it in, is the cost of this. In Spain, it's been calculated that in order to have universal basic income, that actually it's at the level of 60% of the median wage, which is the kind of the poverty line. That's going to cost something like 25% of GDP, even taking into account the consolidation of all the welfare payments. So that's already incorporated in there. So that is not something that realistically is going to happen. That's why, in principle, although there are many parties, so for example, the Podemos party in Spain, which is kind of to the left of the Socialist Party, and all these coalitions, it's Podemos and some of the other kind of parties that are to the left of Socialist Party, they're very very favorable to universal basic income. And I think in the last elections of Catalonia, the current regional government was allowed to pass only on the condition that they that they did a serious pilot on universal basic income. So the idea is very popular. It's just that I don't think it's realistic, at least in the short run, given the budgetary constraints. That's why other forms of welfare, like negative income taxes, for example, that are more affordable, might be a better idea. Some consolidation of welfare programs in a way that was less kind of give less disincentive to work. So that's why negative income tax is good, because the disincentives to work are less than the normal welfare programs. But other ideas in that direction that lower the complexity. In fact, this is one way where, since you're interested in AI, information technology would be a good way to try to deal with this in Europe. This idea of it's sometimes it's difficult. People are poor, they're difficult to get, and so on. They may not sign up for the program. They may not know how to sign up for the program, but information technology, artificial intelligence would be good tools to try to incorporate people that are kind of outside the system and try to make sure that they get some help from the system in any case. And that's the alternative route that is being followed, at least by the Spanish government, is trying very hard to. They've created a minimum. It's called ingreso mínimo vital, so a minimum vital income, which basically is a conglomeration of former, welfare programs, and try to make it easy to enroll. And I think that's a more realistic approach. And I mean, even Podemos now in government is supporting it as a, well, let's start with this. Let's see how far we go in getting more people in the welfare system unenrolled, make it easy to enroll, make it easy to locate them. And then over time, depending on how the budget goes, we might go into more ambitious ideas.
Interesting. So that's, I mean, so your opinion is that UBI is a cost too far, that the governments would never go for that. And I think I agree. It's just overwhelmingly expensive at this point. And I've seen analyses from certain organizations like UBI Works saying, yes, we can pay for it with these particular changes. We're going to have savings in bureaucracy for welfare. We're going to have savings in healthcare. We're going to have, we have to increase corporate taxes, or we have to increase taxes on the wealthy.
That's right.
All of these things have to go together.
You would need a serious increases in taxes and a lot of savings and efficiencies in order to do that. So I would go first for, let's make the fiscal system stronger by being able to get more money, and at the same time work on the efficiencies. That the efficiencies can come already from the standard welfare programs if they are better run. So once you start building up better ways to get the cash and more savings, you can progressively become more ambitious. But I'd see it as a kind of long-term goal rather than an immediate thing that you can do.
Yeah. But in the short term, I still agree with you that there's going to be a very fast transition, again, similar to the robotics innovation. When AI rolls in, there's going to be a lot of people out of work looking for jobs. And this is something that, what can we do in the short term, if we don't have governmental change? I mean, that happens on long time scales, right? And how do we cushion this blow that's coming to us? What are the short term things we could do?
So I think that the key, at least for a country like Spain, is work on three things at the same time. One is make sure that training for the young is done so that they don't have to face this problem, so that they are trained not for the world of today, but for the world of tomorrow. And this requires the whole educational system to be rejigged. The other thing is that you need a lot of retraining for people that will be losing their jobs, but actually also retraining on the job for people that maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the day after, but in 10 years from now, they're going to suffer from this. And there is an opportunity in both of these dimensions, because the number of students, both at college and below, in most developed countries is going to be decreasing over the next few years. Spain is a particularly good case, good in quotations, because the population is a disaster. So we have a very low birth rate, but this creates an opportunity to kind of use the extra resources the education system has to kind of retrain lots of people. And then those are the kind of more proactive measures, but we also need the actual cushion is for the people who lose their jobs. In addition to retraining, we're going to have to just give them money while they retrain, so that they don't lose the capacity to contribute to the system in the future.
Yeah, I think we should also think about how AI is going to work with society. I mean, this is something that is, at this point, is available to everybody, and gives you, it's effectively going to be like, I think, an assistant to make could make each person more effective. And sure, you know, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs because you're going to need less people to do the same work in certain jobs, but it also opens up possibilities. So I think that's something that we could also envision helping a lot of people into new lines of work, or into being able to do more things. So I'm somewhat optimistic on working with AI has a lot of very interesting benefits in terms of labor saving and getting rid of the sort of simple work that is mind numbing. But at the same time, by getting rid of that work, you're not getting paid for that work. So it's a catch-22 a little bit. I'm not sure how it's going to roll out, but I know there's going to be a significant impact on economies and jobs, and finding a way through to work through this, I think, is going to be an important aspect of coming years.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be very important.
So I think we're running close to the end of our time slot. Do you have any last messages or ideas you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think we've covered most of the important ones, but I'd say something that two things that are probably important, which is I encourage people to be like open to new ideas. Just like I'm saying that the work world of today is not going to be the work world of 10 years from now. The social world of today is not going to be the one in 10 years from now. And some ideas that look potentially ridiculous, like universal basic income, haha, who knows? Right now, maybe it's not the time, but 10 years from now might be a different world. I mean, maybe AI really lives up to the true promise, and we don't really need to work. So John Maynard Keynes, in 1930s, said that people would be working 2 hours a day, in 2020. Well, didn't work out, but who knows? Maybe in his prediction comes through 40 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now. I don't know. The rate of change that AI is going to bring to humanity is huge. So we need to be prepared, particularly the young people who are going to live through that. They need to be prepared for big changes, and that requires an open mind to a whole lot of things. Like maybe there's policies that seem irrational now will not seem irrational 10 years from now, and I think that's important. And also look out, be willing to experiment and to try out new things. And when someone proposes to you, just keep an open mind. I think that's very important.
Well, thank you for your insights, Antonio. I really appreciate you coming on the show and for taking the time. I'll send you a Rational View t-shirt like I'm wearing here.
Yeah.
For taking the time. So thank you so much for coming and chatting with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fantastic. Thank you very much.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.